Hey everyone, it's Jessie from b.a.r.e Flower Farm, and today we are going to have a flower farmer business class course on bouquet profitability. I want to break this down in a mathematical and logical way, but I also want to talk about the evolution of my personal learnings when it comes to selling and creating a profitable bouquet. Now, if you're new to my channel, I am entering into my third year of flower farming. I have a business background, a marketing background. I've also had a side hustle soap business before. So I'm not new to the business world, but I am new to the growing world. And part of the evolution of my thinking is better understanding what flowers are out there to getting better at growing and how the things impact now how I think about bouquet profitability. But before we get there, I think it's really important for us to talk about the fundamentals of what are the two components that make a bouquet profitable. And I know when you look at this, you're going to say, yes, of course, it's revenue and cost. But I want to break these down because there might be things that you're not considering. So let's start with the revenue side. So I have four things laid out here on the revenue side. We first got the price of the bouquet, which is basically how much can you sell the bouquet for? That is obviously the main factor in revenue over here. But some other things that people may not be considering, especially if they're starting out, is where are you selling this bouquet? Because the perceived value of the sales outlet that you are selling at may actually impact how high or low you can go on this price point. So to give you a tangible example, I sell a lot of retail bouquets, or I did in my first year, at a farmer's market. This farmer's market had a threshold where I observed people really are not willing to pay over $20 for an average market type bouquet that they're just putting on their dining room table. Now, they're willing to go up in price if it's like a holiday, like Mother's Day, but for the most part in the summer when there's a vegetable farm that brings cheap flowers, they're really not willing to go that high. However, if you step into a florist shop, obviously no one at a florist shop is selling bouquets at $20, more so because they have a lot of overhead that they have to cover. But nevertheless, when you walk into a florist shop, you are expecting to pay more, and therefore the perceived value of this bouquet also goes up. Similarly, if you're selling at a grocery store, no one's expecting to pay $60 for a bouquet at a grocery store, right? So the sales outlet in which you are selling at definitely has an impact on the price of the bouquet. The third part kind of goes into the second part over here, which is the design element, but people who have a floristry background or are really good at designing good, well-structured bouquets can command a premium because now the value of the flowers goes beyond just the input of the flowers, but also the artistry and the craft of designing the bouquet. And of course, number 4 is the type of focals. I think as flower farmers, we put a lot more emphasis on number 4 when we're starting out, more so than the other 3 to our detriment. And I know myself, I'm looking at, well, do I have the right focals? Do I have the focals that people want? Am I pricing them correctly? And I think that in some ways, this feels like it's throwing us off. It's important, obviously, for us to consider what are the focals that appeal to our customer base, how much should I value them at? But I really do think that we need to make sure that we are looking at the first 3 over the 4th one. So these are all of the high level inputs that go into the revenue piece when it comes to bouquet profitability. Now let's talk about the cost side, which actually gets more interesting. And this is the piece where I want to focus on a little bit more in the rest of the video. So similar to the revenue side, I have 4 components that make up cost. The first 2 are ones that make a lot of sense. One is the cost of the flowers themselves. And I'm talking about the seed or the plugs, the transplants that you buy from. What is the cost of the hard good that you are buying? Or if you're buying in flowers from someone else, what is the cost of that? The second one is the biggest piece of the pie. And this is the time to grow and harvest, AKA labor. So I want to spend the rest of the video on these 2 points and the evolution of my thinking around these 2 points. But before I get there, let's talk about 3 and 4. 3 is the time to create a bouquet. And I would say that in my first year when I was making market bouquets, I was really laser focused on this. And for a good reason, because I was spending like 5 minutes making a single bouquet, which is way too much. When you hear from Erin Benzakein of Floret as well as Lenny Larkin, both of them have cited a 30-second per bouquet benchmark for their teams, which is honestly an insane number. The fastest I've ever gotten to was just below like 90 seconds. I want to say it was 75 seconds. For me, I don't grow enough flowers to have a dedicated recipe and to have an assembly line. So it's really hard for me to get down to that 30-second mark. But if you are consistently making 20 plus bouquets, this is definitely an area where you want to focus on. The fourth part here is similar to here on the revenue side, the sales outlet. Sometimes, depending on where you're selling, there might be a commission that they're taking, like at a shop. Or there might also be a booth fee if you're selling at a farmer's market. So all of this does impact cost. What I am not including in here is the general overhead of running a business. So for example, running your irrigation or having accounting software or a website, because you're gonna have to have all of these in place, whether or not you're selling a bouquet or not. I mean, maybe if you weren't selling bouquets, you wouldn't have irrigation. But the point is that those costs are a little bit more spread out across a variety of things that you sell versus just a singular bouquet. So we're gonna keep that out of the equation for now. Now, in this next part, I really wanna focus on number 1 and number 2. I want to take this time to quickly talk about a free resource that I am launching, which is a newsletter. Now, I have a Patreon where some of you are members and you contribute $5 a month to help me make these videos. And in that Patreon, I take a deep dive into videos such as this, where I give more of the numbers and things like that. That's for people who really, really want the specifics on flower farming. But there are so many things that go on my head that never make it into a YouTube video because there's not enough substance or there really isn't a big enough audience who wants to learn about those things. There are things that I read, business books, marketing concept articles, things that I think would actually be really interesting to many of you, and I want to offer that for free. So if you're interested, the link to my newsletter is below. I only plan on sending out a newsletter every other week, so twice a month. It's not super often, and you can read it at your own leisure. So now without further ado, let's go back to talking about bouquet profitability. I had a couple of ahas in this season already. The first aha came when I went to the grand opening of the floral co-op that I sell at with other growers, and I was observing the types of florals that we had. We had these florals that people were babying in high tunnels like ranunculus, anemones, all the stuff that we prize during the early spring season. But we also had a couple of growers who were consistently bringing in perennials. So that was aha number 1, and you'll see how that flows into this conversation. The second aha I had was during Mother's Day, and I made a market video up here if you haven't seen it yet. But Mother's Day really, really hammered home this aha I had at the floral co-op. And so what I want to do is I want to illustrate this through 2 examples that I have on the whiteboard. But before I talk about those 2 examples, I want to say that when I started out in my flower farming journey, which was just 2 years ago, the videos that I was referencing were videos put out by Floret and some other well-established flower farms that had the scale of people who were growing, as well as just like land and a system in place. So when I watched the Floret videos on how to build a bouquet, how to make efficient bouquets, Erin was talking about how she had 8 elements in her bouquets, and I can't even name you all 8, but it was something to the extent like a focal flower, an accent flower, or a disc flower, something with spikes, something with air, something with texture, something with filler. I think that gets you to like 7 different types of flowers. But when you first start out and you've never sold flowers or even grown flowers, you say to yourself, oh my God, I need to grow all 8 of these in order to make a market bouquet. And right then and there, I remember saying to myself, I'm not gonna grow all 8, but I'm gonna try to grow like 4 of these elements to put together a market bouquet. And very quickly, I became overwhelmed because I had zero flower growing experience. I had some vegetable growing experience in containers, but until we moved to this property, I had never grown like in a real field, like in the ground. So a lot of that was new to me. And I would say that for that reason, it made a lot of sense for me to grow a few things. And that brings me to bouquet number 1, which is a bouquet that is focused primarily on focals. I know this is an extreme case. There are very few people who put bouquets together just full of focals. I actually do during the winter season when there's tulips, because there's really no other options in terms of local flowers, and they work really, really well. But for the purposes of this example, I think it's important for us to consider a bouquet that's just focals, and we're gonna price those focals at $2 a stem. So assuming there's 10 stems in a bouquet, $2, you get $20 for this bouquet. Again, an extreme example, but you'll see where I'm coming from. The second bouquet here is a little bit more balanced. And when I say filler here, I'm combining green filler with things like celosia, things that have a bit more of like a spike or an air element. So I'm kind of lumping everything that's not a focal or an accent flower into a filler. And for simplicity's sake, we're gonna say that the focals stay at $2 a stem and the filler stays at $1 a stem. Again, might be a little bit underpriced, but we're trying to keep the math simple. So in this example over here, we've got 8 stems. This is actually supposed to say 3 stems. Okay, so we've got 8 stems in this bouquet. And at the way that it is currently priced, it's gonna cost us $13 a bouquet, but the perceived value is actually $20, which means that there is a $7 delta or increase over this bouquet. So I am making more on bouquet number 2 because I am obviously putting in lower cost flowers than in bouquet number 1. So obviously this makes sense. Now I want to take bouquet number 2 to the next level because this is where the ahas come in. So the first aha for me is that for the newer grower, it actually makes sense to grow fewer varieties. And this goes back to what I was just saying before. In year 1, many of us are learning how to grow. We're also learning how to build a business. We're also learning how to find the market for our flowers. We're doing marketing, we're doing sales. We're doing a bunch of different things in this initial year that realistically growing should actually be a very small part of the pie of running a flower farm business. I'm gonna repeat that again. Growing should be a small part of the pie of running a flower farm business. I think that as you go on and you get bigger, there's always going to be time that you need to dedicate to the business side of running a business. But I think that the initial setup is done, and therefore it leaves you with more time to grow other stuff. So you benefit from a lot of efficiencies if you just focus on a few flowers in those beginning years, because that allows you to spend the time to build your customer base and focus on the business side of things. The other thing that's also really important is the fewer things you grow, the better you get at knowing how to grow them, the less you feel overwhelmed, and the more efficiencies you might actually be able to observe because you're not running around overwhelmed growing a bunch of different types of flowers. So this brings me to my second aha, which is that as one gets bigger and has more demand for flowers and needs to make more bouquets on a weekly basis, it becomes now in your best interest to diversify into more crops, because the amount of time and labor and the inefficiencies of growing more crops gets significantly outweighed by this piece over here, which is the delta that you can fetch with having a lower priced stem in this bouquet. So for example, if you were to make both types of bouquets, but you only made 20 bouquets a week, having an extra $7 over 20 bouquets is only $140. But imagine if now you're cranking out 100 bouquets a week, that $7 is now $700. And let's play this to the next degree, which is the amount of stems that you need. Let's say you need 100 bouquets a week. In this example over here, 100 bouquets at 10 stems is 100 times 10 or 1,000 stems. You need to harvest, process, and put together 1,000 stems into 100 bouquets. In this example over here, because you only have 8 stems instead of 10, you are saving yourself 200 stems on a weekly basis. You only need 800 stems to harvest, to process, and to put into bouquets. And this is what I'm saying is that, yes, there is inefficiencies with growing more crops, but there's also efficiencies with needing to harvest and basically process less stems to make it into another bouquet that might actually have the same exact perceived value for the end customer. And that brings me to my final and third aha, which dives deeper into this, and that is around perennials. So this became glaringly obvious to me when I was at my co-op, and I said earlier that I was observing that certain growers were only bringing in perennials and doing pretty well off of those perennials. Remember, perennials are one and done. You put them in and basically they establish themselves and they keep on giving. You do not need to replant them. You do not need to tend them to generally maintain them. I mean, you might need to do a little bit of maintenance, but it's nowhere near the level of maintenance that you need to do for something like an annual. So the reason why this now becomes really important, especially this time of year, because for those of you who are new to flower farming and don't know, spring is typically one of the busiest times and most profitable times for a flower farmer. People are coming out of the dreary winter months. They want fresh flowers and they are willing to pay up for those flowers. In the summer, you start getting people who are going on vacation. Some people might even grow their own flowers that they enjoy in their garden, even if they're not cutting them. The demand for flowers goes down in the summer. So our open window of big opportunity is actually in the spring. And I realized that I significantly missed out because I did not invest in perennials. I had certain types of perennials that were what I call short-lived perennials, like foxglove and sweet William. They flowered for me in the first year. I kept them in the ground. They flowered for me again. And that was a testament to just how profitable those are, because I had already paid for the labor and the cost of those stems last year when I was making my bouquets and selling them for Mother's Day. This year, everything that I had from those was extra gravy, and the only cost I had was harvesting and putting those bouquets together. Now, when I think about the missed opportunity over here, it's really in this filler piece of it, because there are very few focal perennials that come in this time of year from Mother's Day. I mean, where I am in New Jersey in zone 7A, there are things like lilacs that come. What else is there? Like, I can't really even think about much else that blooms this time of year naturally that's a perennial. So oftentimes we are focused on babying the annuals, the heavy hitting annuals that fetch us a higher price point, like ranunculus, anemones, tulips. Those are just to name a few. But if I had invested in filler, I could have gone a lot further with those bouquets. So in my Mother's Day bouquets, I bought in extra ranunculus. I had some tulips. I also bought a lot of filler, and I bought a lot of filler that were perennials. That was the difference between me making something like 20 bouquets versus 32 bouquets, because filler can obviously enhance the perceived value of a bouquet, but also allow you to use less stems to get to that same price point. So what are some of the perennials I could have and should be investing in, which I am, by the way? Hellebores, mint, Solomon seal, vinca, brunera, viburnum, nepeta, which I actually have in my landscaping. That's catmint. That also saved my butt because I was able to put a few stems of nepeta and make the bouquets feel a little bit more full. Spirea is a good one. I put sweet William on here because it really can be a perennial for people. Geranium is another one. So there are so many perennials that flower this time of year. I haven't even listed the others like columbine, GM. They all start flowering for us this time of year. The point is, I really need to be investing in filler type of perennials if I want to maximize my Mother's Day for next year. Let's now talk about a concrete example that feels a little bit more realistic. And this is actually a bouquet recipe that I did use in my first year with sunflowers, basil, and snaps. So for a market bouquet that you could price around, we'll call it like $15 to $20, 4 sunflower stems, 3 basil stems, 2 snap stems. And this is assuming that the basil stem is kind of like branching, it's a little bit fluffier, right? So it gives it a little bit more fill. Now, if we take what I just said in terms of investing in perennials, and instead of planting in basil, we substitute mint, which flowers around the same time as basil. You guys, if you've been following me, you know I love mountain mint. Mountain mint would be a great substitute. I put that mountain mint in once. It continues to flower for me throughout the years. It will even spread for me and grow even more. So I can now eliminate the cost of buying basil seeds or plugs, the cost of the time and labor associated with planting these, having to run irrigation, water, babying these. The only thing that I have to factor in is harvesting the mint. So now, even though the cost of this bouquet from a stem value might actually look the same, many of us don't track labor. And this is where the significant savings of perennials come in, because you are now taking out the labor piece, which we don't track. And I want to end with this. I downloaded an app to track my labor for a full week, and it was scary. I mean, it was so bad that I actually stopped tracking it. And I use this app at a time of year right now where I am putting in plugs. I was just curious around how much time am I spending planting in a 216 or 128 cell tray? How much time am I spending watering my lilies? And like, how much time am I spending trying to do weed management? And the numbers that came back when I multiplied them by a $20 per hour rate were so staggering that I was like, am I even making any money once I factor in labor? And that is really what propelled me to think more deeply about this. This, as well as the experience that I had making bouquets and buying in filler that were perennials, is that a bunch of us are leaving a lot of money on the table by consistently growing things that are annuals, basically. And I think that when you first start flower farming and you're looking for free resources, yes, there are resources on perennials, but I think that there's a lot more resources on summer annuals, things that you have to start again. And like, I find that from a filler perspective, I knew that one of the biggest shortcomings for anyone in year one is not having enough filler. But really, most of the time when I heard people talk about filler, it was annual fillers. And it took me to go to my co-op to see from other experienced growers that there are so many fillers out there that don't have to be annual. And I think that this is a piece where I am really going to invest my time in. So what did I do over the last few days? I received about $700 worth of perennial plugs. I don't have the biggest space here, so I want to balance volume with cost, but I can't buy in like 128 plugs of things like Veronica because I don't have room for all of that. So I found on Edney there was a grower that is selling 32 trays. So these are not plugs, these are actually like transplants. I bought Agistache, Veronica, Echinacea, so like the double flowering type of Echinacea. Also bought Stairway to Heaven. And then I tried to buy Baptisia, but they were sold out. So I was trying to buy perennials that could both act as fillers as well as an accent or even a focal. The double scoop type of Echinacea can actually be a pretty good focal. They look awesome in person. But the point that I'm trying to say is that now when I am putting in something into the ground, I'm thinking about the labor that takes and what are some other things that I could substitute where I only need to put it in once. I know a lot of you more established growers are going to say, Jesse, how did it take you almost 2.5 years to figure this out? And I'm putting this out there because I know I am not the only one who came to flower farming with very little flower growing experience. So I'm hoping that if you are like me entering into flower farming thinking that it's all annuals, I hope that you really start taking the time to invest in learning about perennials. And so my friend Jordan from Jordan's Flower Farm, she's out in Oklahoma. She and I are actually going to be doing a live this Sunday on the 19th at 10 a.m. Eastern Time. Lives are a really good time for us to connect with you. You guys can ask questions in real time. If you can't make the live, it is recorded and put back on YouTube. I even put it in a podcast format called Blooming Profits. But we're going to be talking about woodies, perennials, and short-living perennials. Jordan also invested a lot in perennials, way more than me because she has like 10 acres. And she really understood the value of perennials because she had spent years growing in her landscape. And in her first year of cut flower farming, back when she was at her old house, she relied so much on her perennials to make bouquets in the spring. I know that Marie from Florist on Farms, who I reference often, she also posts how she relies on her perennials this time of year. And so that is a great live to join in case if you want to learn more. I'm going to end with these bouquets that Jordan made literally yesterday, comprising majority of perennials. She's got yarrow in there. She's got baptisia, foxglove. These are all things that can come back year after year, especially if we just give them the time to establish and stay in the ground. And again, very, very profitable bouquets. Spring is the time when things are a little bit more whimsical, are a little bit more romantic looking, and I actually think that these bouquets look a lot better than some of the ones that are a little bit more focal dominated. So I hope you will join us in our live, and I'll see you in the next video.